I'm Mike Baker, and welcome to National Arts. On this edition of the program, we'll explore the musical roots of ragtime and jazz, trace a bit of their history, and examine their overall health in the musical milieu of today. First, let's start with ragtime, one of the biggest music sensations in the 1890s and early 1900s. We're all familiar with Scott Joplin's The Entertainer, which was popularized during the 1970s by the movie The Sting. Well, now there's a new Joplin-esque virtuoso on the horizon. His name is Reginald Robinson, and he's not only performing the rags of Scott Joplin, but he's composing a whole slew of his own.
Scott Joplin really started a whole new thing as far as approaching ragtime. Ragtime was weak, really. Before he formed it, I thought about what was Scott Joplin. I know because he mentioned in the School of Ragtime that ragtime was here to stay. That's in his introduction. And I have on my new CD the same thing. Actually it's a School of Ragtime, and I mentioned the same thing. So now it can be proven what he said back then. It's a fact. It's still here, you know. Portrait of Scott Joplin is what the title says it is. It's in a portrait, from what I see, in a portrait. For me, looking at portraits of Scott Joplin, which is only about 3 or 4 of them, I've noticed that every time I look at it, it's something new in it. You know, it's not. How would I say it? Every time I look at it, I get it. It's a different expression, or I get a different thought, or maybe what he's thinking, or trying to figure out what was he thinking. That's the key point right there. When I look at it, I'm always trying to figure out what was he thinking when he took this picture. And then by me looking at it, it's always like, well, maybe he could have been thinking about this, maybe he could have been thinking about that, maybe because, you know, just fascinated by it. And if you notice when I play it, or anybody who heard me play it anywhere, I never play it the same way. So every time I approach it differently. So it's kind of like my tribute to what I saw, you know.
Hearing the very young ragtime performer and composer Reginald Robinson, who do you liken him to?
Well, as a composer, he sounds like he's deeply influenced by very, very early Scott Joplin. Scott Joplin of the first 4 or 5 years of his ragtime writing. That would be 1897, 1900, 1901, 1902. There's a rollicking good time feel to Robinson's work. He's a very muscular player. He has lots of strength in his arms and in his fingers. You hear it right away, and it's a very straightforward approach. It doesn't meander this way or that. It goes straight to the point.
It's sort of out of the ordinary to me, because I never thought that he really felt like that about ragtime, you know. We had other music in the house, like Bach and Beethoven. I played stuff like that for my children, because I always wanted better things out of life for them, you know. But ragtime, I never thought he would go into that era at all.
Janet also endured endless hours of practice so Reggie could perfect his ragtime style, a style that might never have been heard if it were not for Chicago performer John Weber, who befriended Reggie and shopped his songs around.
I'd heard about him, and one night Mac came in with Reggie, and Reggie had this great big manila envelope full of music. And first thing, I was playing a song called No Strings. It's 1935, Irving Berlin. And I can see Reggie, you know, as he's sitting down, singing the words. I thought, wait a minute, how do you know? And he said, that's, Irving Berlin did it, right? That was Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. He knew what I was playing. And he was probably the only one in the room who knew what I was playing. And I was amazed, and I said, what's in the envelope? He said, oh, do you read music? And he got out this music, and each page, I couldn't even believe what I was seeing. So I thought, you wrote this? It was flawless. It was amazing. And I said, I want to hear you play this stuff. So we went over to Mac's house, and I'm parking my car, and I could hear it halfway down the street. I thought, it's two people. No way. And I walked in, and there he's just playing away this amazing stuff. And he wrote it all. I wrote this one yesterday. And the thing is, I mean, you hear him once, and you think, my gosh, he's a once-in-a-generation player. And people ought to hear him. You know, I guess tried to put myself in Reggie's place, thinking if I was 19 and I didn't have any money and didn't know anybody, what would I do? Well, I guess I would just give my best product on tape, send it out to anybody who might be in a position to help, and I sent some out to some people, and we got some responses. And one of the responses was Delmark Records, who signed him to a 3-CD deal. And next thing you know, all of a sudden he's doing gigs, and he starts getting invitations to play. Oh, he's in New York. Oh, really? You know. So I mean, good for him. He deserves it. Reggie is, in my opinion, a unique player on the scene today, in the music scene, in as much as he is the only player I can think of, young, old, or anything in between, who plays in the style and manner idiomatically correct ragtime.
Reggie's similarity to Joplin doesn't stop with the musculature of his playing or the preciseness of his rags. With over 40 compositions to his credit, Reggie also mirrors Joplin's propensity for composing.
He was a learned musician. Most of the guys then played by ear, as they say, but he was a learned musician. He could read and write the music, and of course, he was one of the first to become published.
Joplin's success as a publisher enabled him to experiment in a variety of music genres. Not surprisingly, this is a path that Reggie has also charted for himself. Where do you want to be 5-10 years from now?
Publisher.
A publisher.
Yeah.
Publishing all kind of music?
Hopefully, yeah. That's what I don't intend on just being a publisher of ragtime. You know, I intend on publishing whatever is good. You know, whatever I feel is good music.
Because like I said, I really always thought Reggie would be an artist. You know, because he had won a lot of awards for District 7 schools, drawing. And I thought that he would really become an artist, but when I saw the music instilled in him, you know, I knew this was really something that was going to happen then.
Most of the recent interest in ragtime composition has been among white Americans, so I'm especially pleased to see an African-American young man, get involved in composing this music and creating a new body of literature.
He really has gotten inside the heads of a lot of the composers from the ragtime era, and he seems to truly understand idiomatically what it is they were trying to say, and he says it himself. And nobody else around is doing that.
The resurrection of ragtime in the late 1900s is a phenomenon unprecedented in America's musical history. Never before has a long-buried style been so widely and eagerly embraced by a mass public. Much of the credit for this resurgence goes to Scott Joplin. However, it's composers like Reginald Robinson who will help carry ragtime's direct melodic and harmonic message, its irresistible foot tapping and rhythmic impulse, into the next century. Ragtime's popularity waned with the advent of the New Orleans jazz sound in the 1920s. What lay ahead was an amalgam of gospel, spiritual, blues, folk, minstrel, and marching band music. This new jazz sound had such a far-reaching effect musically that it spawned worldwide movements in art, dance, and music. What's an enigma to many, however, is how something so uniquely American has never been considered an exalted music tradition in this country.
I think the fundamental reason is that jazz has been held back is racism. For so long, any cultural product, no matter how great, produced by people of color was just not treated with respect or liking by many white Americans, let's face it. Also, there's been a tendency in the academy and in the great concert halls across the nation to say that if it didn't come from Europe, it's not as good as it could be.
The lack of acceptance here in America forced many of the jazz greats to consider overseas performance. Musicians like Sidney Bechet, absolute master of the soprano saxophone and clarinet and jazz's most rhapsodic soloist, were so well received that they called Europe home for a time. Others like fellow saxophonist Steve Lacy followed suit. While America's goodwill ambassador Duke Ellington was content to just tour abroad, it was clear that overseas performance was not only a financial necessity, but a real ego booster as well.
The French always loved jazz from the 20s and the 30s, well, first of all, they like art per se, and artists are welcome here in a way, and jazz musicians were considered artists and still are, and so we have a good reception here. Also, the fact that Sidney Bechet was a big star here and lived here and really founded, sort of set up the thing for me to come later on. That helped a lot, really. I'm not too thrilled at what's going on in America with jazz-wise, really. To me, I left in the 60s because jazz was underground. And we stayed away for a long time. Then we started going back, and when we go back, it's better than ever for us. But for the musicians there, I find that jazz is underdog. And I find that it seems like it's got a reputation, well, it doesn't make much money, therefore it's underdog.
You know, I know Steve Lacy, and he's been living in Europe for a number of years now. For myself, there are a lot of Americans who think that I don't play acoustic jazz anymore because they haven't seen any output from me, and they haven't seen any concerts of me playing acoustic jazz in America in a long time. But every year I play straight ahead jazz in Europe and in Japan because the audience there's much more of a built-in audience in Europe and Japan for jazz.
Composer, pianist, publisher, and Broadway music director Hilton Felton is another musician who never turns down an overseas gig. Hilton feels that jazz's lack of impetus in this country may be attributed to the very diverse and improvisational nature of the animal.
there are a lot of pockets of jazz. There are a lot of communities of jazz. And I feel that jazz has to come under one umbrella, and people have to unite and really support this music and the artists who are doing it. You have people who are stuck on an era or who are stuck on one type, if you will, of jazz music, and I think that's where the problem lies. You know, my jazz is better than your jazz, and this kind of a thing.
It's this diversity of jazz that has also spawned figurative movements in art and dance. Renowned American artist Frederick Brown traces his appreciation of jazz as a young boy growing up on Chicago's South Side by conveying dignity and proper historical perspective.
I find that the blues and jazz has had a great effect on my work, more from the standpoint of the work ethic that musicians have. When I first went to New York, the first artist that I knew in New York was Ornette Coleman, who is a fantastic jazz musician and composer. And I had grown up in Chicago with Anthony Braxton, who later became a great musician and also just received the MacArthur Award this year, he and Ornette both. So, you know, my introduction to the art world was via music. And I've always thought that the music sort of set the stage for the type of rhythms that I tried to find in my work.
Brown, like contemporary artist Billy D. Williams, endeavors to harness the jazz musician's spirit rather than simply capture his likeness.
You know, when I grew up, we grew up on jazz. I mean, it was all around, everywhere, and particularly bebop. I mean, that to me was like an original moment in American musical history. And so I embraced it, and I decided I really wanted to try and talk about those, to try to get inside of it from my perspective as a painter and see what I could come up with and see how it would impact on people.
In a way, your art is helping to elevate the art form, the jazz art form.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. But it's fine arts again. We're talking about fine arts. It's like Betty Carter to me is one of the great exponents of vocalese, jazz vocalese, and you know, and there are a lot of people. She came up with a lot interesting. She came up with Sarah Vaughan. She came up with Ella Fitzgerald, who were all great scat people when they got into it. But she for me had something very, very different, very special, and sometimes that difference and that special difference is not understood until years later. And I think of jazz that way, or this whole question. I don't really like to call it jazz. I really like to call it improvisational music.
Dance, too, has benefited greatly from jazz's improvisational nature. While early jazz was primarily dance music, the new jazz calls on dance's interpretive skills.
I remember many years ago, I was on a panel with Dave Brubeck, and there were several of us who were jazz musicians who were asked the question, do you jazz musicians who now play in these tiny clubs where you cannot dance miss the fact that people don't dance to your music? So most of us said no. We'd rather play to, you know, to be heard and have people listen attentively and so forth. Dave said, no, I want people to dance. He said, I get a different kind of rhythm when I play and they're out there dancing. And I thought about that for a while, and I realized, well, that is a different feeling. And having played in dance bands and so forth, I remember that. But I was of the generation, having grown up with 52nd Street and Birdland and those clubs, and that was what I had grown up with. When I was here in Washington, D.C., I mean, I played dances and I played all kinds of things, and so it was a combination. And it was a little different for me. When I got to New York, that was kind of the big time, and I'm playing now for people to listen, and that was very, very nice. I like that. It is coming full circle now, and having written a piece for David Parsons that is one of the most successful pieces that I've ever written, I'm looking forward to working with other dancers.
The musical Cats really embraces the jazz idiom, both in the dance and the music, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yes, it does. Well, I think that artists admire and study other artists, and I think that we allow ourselves to become influenced by them.
And jazz and the music is absolutely an integral part of American culture, and Andrew was very receptive to incorporate it into his music, because that's something very American and very special about our contribution to the art form.
Oh, when the milk is missing, bring in a pig spin stable, all the glass is broken, and the there's the wonder of the thing, cavities not there.
Whether in dance, composition, or solo performance, some jazz musicians are making very good livings. Herbie Hancock is no exception. But the one common denominator among all of them is that they have to be multifaceted in order to flourish. Throughout your career, there's been this pattern of virtuoso work, collaboration, healthy collaboration, a little more virtuoso collaboration. I get the impression that really for your maturation as an artist, you need this continuum of playing with other talented musicians.
Absolutely. For me, I can't be everywhere at the same time, and I can't be every person either. But maybe there's a little bit of each of us in all of us. I'm not quite sure. But for me, I really like collaborating with others, because I get ideas from them that stimulate me to create more ideas. And so as the best result to get is where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Hancock's crown of collaboration, film scoring, record producing, and virtuoso work parallel the versatility of many of today's jazz artists. The brilliant music direction of the popular Five Guys Named Mo is yet another avenue Hilton Felton has found to celebrate jazz. How hard is it for the jazz musician to make a living as a musician, or do you have to do what you do, and that is musical director, composer, recording artist, and performer?
Well, you just answered the question, the fact that I'm doing all those things, because if I had to depend solely on one thing entirely, I think I wouldn't make it. So I have to try to have all of those things going for me, to make it happen.
Yet another jazz impresario who writes for stage and screen is Dick Hyman. Hyman's success scoring for Woody Allen's films are what enable him to help young artists as the artistic director of the 92nd Street Y in New York.
With Woody, I've always been, and continue to be from time to time, piano player, arranger, conductor, or composer, or whatever. In the last film, which is on release now, which is, I believe, called Bullets Over Broadway, unless the scene is cut, I am seen conducting a band in a speakeasy during Prohibition. I did the arrangements. And also Derek Smith and I recorded a couple of two piano things which are used for background here and there.
The helping hand Dick and other jazz greats lend young musicians is one important way the jazz legacy has been preserved in this country. Thelonious Monk was one of the earliest examples. Monk always had an open-door policy when it came to young musicians. His row house in New York was always filled with aspiring young talent seeking the wisdom of Monk's tutelage. Thelonious Monk always had an open home. Anybody could come in, he'd help them in any way he could. You do that. You're an educator. You produced Wynton Marsalis's first album.
That was a great opportunity for me. The way that happened, George Butler, who was the head of A&R, Artists and Repertoire at what was in Columbia Records, now Sony Records. So they sent me a tape, and it floored me. And so I just listened to the talent that was coming out of this young kid, you know. And I told them at Columbia Records that, yes, I will be very happy to.
Helping the young musician and educating the public at large about jazz go hand in hand. One of the more unique examples of jazz education is provided by noted scholar and pianist John Eaton. Eaton has toured hundreds of college campuses through the auspices of the Smithsonian's Resident Associates Program, performing and enlightening audiences on the jazz tradition.
Our old friend I Got Rhythm, a tune that in itself spawned more jazz riffs and themes than every other tune in popular music history. Now, in addition to writing jazz themes and riffs, Duke, of course, like Gershwin again, composed many extended pieces.
Right now, because so many young people have been inspired by the fact that Wynton Marsalis has become a major figure in the music, you've got all of this phalanx of young players that are emerging now. Joshua Redman and Jeff Keezer and just Terry Lynn Carrington, a whole lot of wonderful musicians who are getting an opportunity to be heard because the music business is recognizing, well, there's a generation of people that we should pay attention to.
Even with the resurgence of jazz in recent years, the jazz musician still suffers from a lack of musical notoriety. He or she must diversify in order to flourish. Funding for music education is in danger of being cut at a time when more should be spent to educate our young about this underappreciated music tradition.
The future of jazz is threatened because all over the country, school systems, hard-pressed financially, are cutting out not just jazz, but entire music programs. In most of the major cities, in many states, music education has been consigned to the trash can, and it is an incalculable loss to our youth and the future of the music, all music in America, to find this happening, and it gives me great cause for worry.
Jazz, then, is uniquely American. How ironic it's more willingly embraced overseas than at home. What's clear now is the need for more education, promotion, and exposure so that the next generation can fully appreciate the genius of this American art form.